everybody, welcome to Jacob's Quest, and today I just got back from watching Dungeons & Dragons Honor Among Thieves, the brand new Dungeons & Dragons movie, the first one they've tried since the 90s, which I've never seen that 90s one, but, you know, I've seen footage of it. I haven't actually watched the movie, but it's rough looking. Anyways, I'm proud to say that this is a really enjoyable movie, and this is coming from someone who, you know, I don't know much about Dungeons and Dragons. I know like the bare basics of like what it is, but you know, I cannot tell you really anything at all about the lore or the world or what the rules of it are, or even like what all the classes are. Like I could not tell you. I think I tried one time to play, and yeah, so I am not at all like the Dungeons and Dragons guy. So, you know, I thought this was going to be somewhat of an interesting experience because, like, this movie, not only does it have to be like, oh, it's a fantasy movie, but, you know, it's a known property, but not known to me. So I imagine a lot of audience members are going to walk into this and not having any knowledge of Dungeons and Dragons at all. So, you know, I was curious, like, how well are they going to balance that? They got to do a lot of world building and explain the rules of magic and fantasy and the different classes of people and how this works, you know? And I'm proud to say they actually did a pretty good job. In fact, they did a good job at explaining the world building and everything by not over explaining everything. You know, there is, you know, somewhat of an exposition, but that's mostly like character backstory, not necessarily like world backstory, you know? Like, obviously they name drop different locations, and they name drop different, you know, mystical items or old ancient battles that I'm sure are references that many people out there were excited to see. So I'm like, oh, I know that thing. But you know, I did not at any time feel really lost or anything. And I think the big advantage here is that because, you know, if you've watched, you know, if you've watched Lord of the Rings, or you know your basic fantasy tropes and your, you know, iconography of fantasy genre, Dungeons and Dragons is gonna generally play by those rules. So in the same sense of, like, you know, if you can imagine, you know, you watch Guardians of the Galaxy for the first time, but you've seen Star Wars before, you can kind of map this over that. You know, you can take the skin of Guardians of the Galaxy and be like, okay, so you know, just kind of translate this from Star Wars and kind of like map this in a similar fashion. And it's the same thing with this in Lord of the Rings, right? So it's like, obviously it's a whole new world with its own stuff going on, but you can kind of skin this over Lord of the Rings and be like, it's, you know, we can vaguely say it's very similar, right? Anyways, but yeah, the thing that definitely makes this work, of course, are the characters and the actors playing everyone. I'll say for the most part, everyone had their moments, you know, like everyone fit their characters really well, their interactions, you know, there's a lot of comedy beats, and, you know, comparison to Guardians of the Galaxy is not far off, you know, like it definitely is the ragtag group of misfits who are all kind of jokey, and even though they're in this fantasy world, they talk like us, you know what I mean? Like they talk the way that we would talk on Earth, you know, even though they're living in this fantasy world. So, you know, it's definitely more easy to relate. In fact, they do have one character, and they kind of make this the joke. One character is introduced about halfway into the movie who, you know, he speaks the way you would think, like, you know, like a standard fantasy character would speak. You know, it's all sort of old Englishy sounding talk, you know, like, oh, hither thou, you know, like he's like one of those, right? And they kind of make fun of the fact that, like, oh, you don't understand like colloquialisms, you know, you don't understand like basic like metaphors and stuff. You're taking all of this very seriously, you know. And so I can kind of see like, oh, this is, you know, this is like if you're playing Dungeons and Dragons with someone, and like, okay, you got the guys who are just trying to have fun and just joking around the whole time, and then you have the other people who are like, no, we're taking this real serious and we're actually playing into the characters, and like this you know, they want to play a different type of game than the other ones, and that's kind of how you have this one character in there. So, you know, they do acknowledge a lot of the things that maybe, you know, in another world could have been pitfalls for this movie, but they managed to avoid that and make the characters all really relatable and funny, and everything works, you know. On top of that, you know, on top of the fact that like I don't feel lost and the characters are actually really relatable, they introduce a couple really cool things that are unique to this movie, and they definitely they use them really well. The first thing is there's this girl who can shapeshift, and the fact that she can shapeshift into all these different animals, these different mythical beasts. There is a really cool chase sequence where she's trying to get away from this witch, and so she's changing from an owl to a deer to a small little roach to a rat to a dog to a, you know, like, and she's constantly changing and flying and running and, you know, shrinking small and then getting big, you know. So you have like, you know, you almost have like an Ant-Man type thing going on, but also she can fly and then she can, you know, so like they used that so well, and it was such a awesome scene that's like, okay, so it doesn't matter that I don't know anything about Dungeons and Dragons or why this person is able to shapeshift or anything. Like, you get the concept. Here's a really cool way we're going to play around with that with this chase sequence. Another one is you know, halfway through, this other character gets it's basically the portal gun from the Portal games, you know. It's basically that, but it's a staff. So, you know, you can shoot like one portal here and one portal over there, and all of a sudden there you go, you have like your pathway. You can just like go from one place to another, and they use that in really clever ways. They're trying to, you know, get a portal inside of a moving carriage, so they have like something stuck to the bottom of the carriage with one portal, and they're way over there with some rocks, and they're, you know, they're able to go in and out of the carriage and move stuff around. And it was such a cool sequence that I'm like, this could only work in this fantasy world with this portal wand that you've introduced. And the fact that they were able to do stuff like that, I'm like, I hope more people see this movie, because I'm like, this is really cool stuff that they're doing with this. And yeah, so they just, a lot about this really works. Even if you don't know much of anything at all about Dungeons and Dragons, it really works just on its own, you know. And that kind of, you know, unfortunately, I do feel like the fact that it's called Dungeons and Dragons is gonna deter a lot of people, because they're gonna be like, well, I don't know anything about that, so I don't want to go see it. But I'm telling you now, I don't think you need to, you know. Are some people gonna be lost and they're gonna be answering, you know, asking some questions? Sure. But, you know, I don't think that's any different than, you know, when you come across someone who watches The Mandalorian but they haven't seen all the Star Wars, you know, like, they have questions, right? This is going to be a similar thing to that. So yes, I'm sure some people will have questions, but on the whole, I would say, like, you don't really need much to just walk in and watch this movie. Oh, there's also this they showed parts of this in the trailer. I kind of wish they didn't, where they you know, they're able to resurrect someone and ask them 5 questions, or they'll be, you know, and then they return to the dead forever, right? And then they even like, well, why is it only 5? It's like, I don't know, that's just how the magic works, you know. And in part of the trailer, you saw like the one guy they're asking the questions to, and they accidentally like ask him questions unintentionally, and they use them all up, and they have to go dig up another guy. But the joke continues on for like another like 10 people, and they do it in such a creative way where they're like, you know, they're trying to find the location of this MacGuffin, which, you know, that's what this is. It's a fantasy adventure. There's a lot of like fetch quests. They got to go get this thing so they can get this thing so they can do this. But, you know, it's about the adventure. Like, that's what it is. You know, that's what Dungeons and Dragons is. But anyways, they're, you know, so they're trying to ask him about this battle from long ago, and so they're like, all right, so this thing we're looking for, did you see it? It's like, oh yeah, I saw it, I was handed it, and then I died. And they're like, okay, so we gotta go ask someone else. And then this person's like, oh yeah, this other guy came and he had it for a second, and then I died. You know, so like they're asking these people what they know, but they only know things up until the point that they died. So, you know, it's just a really funny sequence. And yeah, just overall, you know, is some of it kind of predictable, of like, okay, you know exactly what's gonna happen. You know, there's a fake, you know, there's a death fake out at the end, but they have like a resurrection MacGuffin that they were also looking for, and then like, oh, okay, so they got that thing, so the person who died doesn't have to stay dead, you know, that kind of stuff. So some of it is pretty predictable and pretty standard, but just I think the characters are strong enough that they make it work, and even without knowing the world, you understand the tropes enough that like you can, for example, the character who he's talking like he's from a fantasy world, whereas everyone else is talking normal. It's just you understand what they're making fun of in those moments. But yeah, Dungeons and Dragons: Honor Among Thieves. I don't know what the box office is looking like right now. I don't know. There's a lot of competition, obviously. Like, so many movies have come out recently, but like, I hope this one does well enough that they they're willing to continue forward, because they did a good job here, guys. I don't know anything about Dungeons and Dragons, but I'm like, you know what? I'm kind of interested in this world now. So yeah, that's my review. Let me know what you guys thought, and I'll see you guys next time. Bye.